David sat frozen, staring at the disheveled figure of Emily as she stumbled through the door, her heels dangling from one hand, her cheeks flushed from too much alcohol. The sight of her was unsettling, but it wasn't until he noticed her dress, wrinkled and askew, that his stomach dropped. She wasn't wearing any underwear. "Where's your underwear?" David asked, his voice tight, trembling between disbelief and dread. Emily blinked at him lazily, a nervous giggle escaping her lips. "I must have lost them. Maybe at the club." At that moment, the foundation of their marriage began to crumble, one chilling revelation at a time. But before we dive deeper into this gripping story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one. David and Emily's life together seemed like a picture of stability, the kind of marriage others might admire. For years, they had worked tirelessly to build their shared world, and their crowning achievement was a modest but beautiful brick home. It stood as a symbol of their dedication and partnership, a place where laughter echoed in the halls and dreams for the future were whispered in the quiet moments before sleep. Their life together wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable, filled with shared routines and small joys. David, ever the practical one, handled the household finances and preferred quiet evenings at home. Emily, on the other hand, was the more social of the two, with a vibrant personality that drew people to her. She loved hosting dinners, planning nights out with friends, and keeping their calendar busy with events. It was a dynamic that had always worked for them. David trusted Emily's independence implicitly, admiring her energy even as he preferred the simplicity of his own routine. Of course, like any couple, they had their share of disagreements, arguments over bills, the occasional frustration over unwashed dishes or conflicting schedules. But those moments felt minor in the grand scheme of their relationship. They had weathered enough storms to believe they had built something unshakable. For David, their bond was a haven, the one constant in an unpredictable world. Yet beneath the surface, tiny cracks had begun to form. David would sometimes notice the faint distance in Emily's gaze, or the way her laughter at his jokes seemed just a little less genuine. He chalked it up to the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship, a phase that would surely pass. After all, they had made it this far. Why would things fall apart now? But life has a way of shattering illusions at the most unsuspecting moments. The peaceful facade they had carefully built together would soon be tested in a way David never anticipated. The stability he cherished would unravel, piece by piece, until he was left questioning everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved. The air was crisp and cool that October evening, the kind of night that hinted at the coming winter. David sat in his usual spot on the couch, the faint glow of the television flickering against the walls of their familiar living room. A football game was on, but his focus wavered. Emily had left hours ago for a girls' night, her excitement palpable as she twirled in her short black dress before heading out the door. "Don't wait up for me, babe," she'd said with a playful wink. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she left, a subtle reminder of her absence. David had smiled at the time, distracted by the game, and waved her off without a second thought. As the hours ticked by, his initial ease turned into a gnawing unease. By midnight, Emily still hadn't sent a text, not even the quick check-in she usually managed when out with friends. He told himself not to overthink it. Maybe the music was too loud, or she was simply caught up in the moment. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the silence became deafening. At 2 a.m., the front door creaked open. David stood, his heart pounding in a mix of relief and apprehension. Emily stumbled in, her heels dangling from one hand, her purse barely clinging to her shoulder. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her cheeks flushed with the unmistakable signs of too much alcohol. "Hey," she slurred, collapsing onto the couch in a heap. David took a step closer, his voice steady but edged with concern. "Emily, are you okay?" She waved him off with a lazy hand, mumbling something incoherent. Then he noticed it, something that stopped him cold. Her dress, now wrinkled and askew, revealed that she wasn't wearing any underwear. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His stomach churned, his mind racing with questions he didn't want to answer. He swallowed hard, his voice calm but brittle. "Where's your underwear?" Emily blinked at him, her gaze unfocused. "What? You're not wearing any," he repeated, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "Where are they?" Her expression shifted, a fleeting moment of confusion before she giggled, a soft, nervous laugh that only deepened his dread. "Must have lost them, maybe at the club." Her response was like a slap to the face. David stared at her, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You lost them?" Sarah scattered rice and beans into the pile on the console. Emily shrugged, her tone flippant. "Yeah, probably. While dancing, it's not a big deal." "Meaty choice?" "It's always a big deal. You can't storm off like this alone." She smiled at him, almost smiling. "It's not a big deal. Emily, you come home at 2 a.m. drunk, disheveled, and missing your underwear, and you expect me to believe it's not a big deal?" She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples as if he were the one being unreasonable. "God, David, stop making this into something it's not. I went out, had a little too much fun, and that's it." But that wasn't it. Not for him. Her cavalier dismissal of his concern only added fuel to the fire burning inside him. He wanted to believe her, to accept her explanation and chalk it up to a wild night out. But the pieces didn't fit. The woman he'd trusted, the partner he'd built a life with, now felt like a stranger. "Emily," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading, "just tell me the truth." Her eyes flashed with irritation. "I already did. Why can't you just let it go?" Because he couldn't. The trust that had been the foundation of their marriage was cracking, and every flippant word out of her mouth widened the gap. She stood, stumbling slightly, and made her way toward the bedroom. "I'm going to bed," she muttered, leaving him standing in the living room, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. It was a walk up the stairs, he muttered to himself. David sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. The warmth of their home felt suffocating now, the familiar surroundings mocking him. Memories of laughter and love clashed violently with the present reality. He replayed her words, her tone, her disheveled appearance, searching for answers that wouldn't come. The hours dragged on as he sat there, the television still playing in the background. The highlights of the game blurred together, insignificant compared to the storm raging within him. He thought of their vows, the promises they had made to each other. Had those words meant nothing to her? The night stretched into dawn, but sleep never came. Emily's soft snores from the bedroom were a painful reminder of the distance between them, a chasm that now seemed insurmountable. For the first time in their marriage, David felt utterly alone. That night marked the beginning of an unspoken war, a quiet battle between suspicion and trust. David didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: things would never be the same again. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long, pale shadows across the living room. David hadn't moved from the couch. His head throbbed from lack of sleep, but his mind refused to stop spinning. The events of the previous night replayed in a relentless loop. The slurred giggle, the dismissive hand wave, her disheveled appearance, and, above all, the absence of any coherent explanation. Every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong, but the part of him that still clung to hope wanted an answer that didn't destroy the life he'd built with Emily. Emily dropped her hands and looked up toward the building. "Hey!" Yet hope was not enough. At some point, Emily stirred in the bedroom. David heard the shuffle of her feet and the creak of the bathroom door. He stayed frozen on the couch, unsure if he even wanted to face her again. When she eventually emerged, her movements slow and deliberate, she avoided his gaze. Her face was pale, her hair still a mess from the night before. "Morning," she muttered, heading straight for the kitchen without waiting for a response. David's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask her again, to press for answers, but he knew it would be useless. She'd either brush him off or spin some half-hearted excuse. He needed something more, something concrete. When Emily left the house later that morning, mumbling something about running errands, David's heart began to pound. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, he sprang into action. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, carelessly abandoned in her hungover haze. He hesitated, his hand hovering over it. They had always shared passwords and access to each other's devices. There had been no secrets between them. Or so he thought. Now, that trust felt like a bitter memory. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the phone and unlocked it with her passcode. His birthday. The screen blinked to life, innocuous and unassuming. For a moment, he almost felt guilty, like an intruder in his own marriage. But the gnawing doubt quickly silenced that hesitation. He opened her messaging app first. Most of the recent conversations were harmless, exchanges with coworkers, group chats with friends, and mundane reminders. But as he scrolled further, a name caught his eye. Jake. It wasn't familiar. There were no context clues to place him among their shared acquaintances. His stomach tightened as he opened the thread. The messages started innocently enough. Playful banter, jokes about shared interests, and the kind of light flirtation that might have gone unnoticed at first glance. But as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. The text became unmistakably intimate. Jake, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Emily, you're trouble. Jake, you left something behind, by the way. Might have to come get it. Emily, keep it safe for me, lol. David's breath hitched. His vision blurred, the words swimming on the screen as his hands began to shake. He read and reread the messages, hoping he'd misunderstood, that there was some other explanation. But the meaning was clear. Every word was a knife, twisting deeper into his chest. He closed the app and leaned back against the counter, his mind racing. This couldn't be it. There had to be more. He moved onto her email, then her calendar, searching for anything that might corroborate his growing suspicions. When he checked their joint bank statements, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. There it was, a hotel charge, dated the same night as her girls' night. The evidence was damning. The woman he had trusted, the partner he had shared his life with, had betrayed him in the most intimate way. David set the phone down and braced himself against the counter, his legs threatening to give out. A wave of emotions crashed over him. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The home they had built together now felt like a stranger's house, every corner tainted by her lies. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, I don't need more proof. It's all here. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Emily returned home in the late afternoon, cheerful and seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside him. David watched her move around the house, chatting about her errands and making casual plans for the weekend. Her nonchalance was infuriating, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. He didn't confront her. Not yet. The urge was there, bubbling just below the surface, but he held it back. He needed time to think, to plan. Confrontation wouldn't fix this. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or restore the trust she had shattered. If anything, it would give her a chance to lie again, to twist the truth in ways that might confuse him further. He wouldn't give her that power. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence was heavy. Emily scrolled through her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. David studied her, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in her facade, but she seemed perfectly at ease, as if nothing had changed. Emily, he said suddenly, his voice calm but deliberate. She looked up, startled. Yeah? Do you love me? Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. Of course I do. Why would you even ask that? No reason, he replied with a tight smile, letting the conversation drop. But inside, his resolve hardened. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the Emily he thought he knew, and the love she claimed to feel for him meant nothing if it wasn't built on honesty. That night, while Emily slept soundly in their bed, David sat alone in the living room. He stared at the walls, the pictures of their life together, the evidence of years spent building something that now felt like a lie. His mind raced with possibilities, plans, and questions about what came next. By dawn, he had made his decision. There was no salvaging this marriage. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too broken. He couldn't confront her, couldn't stay and endure the constant doubt and pain. He needed to leave, not just the house, but the life they had built together. It was the only way to reclaim his sense of self, to start over. David didn't feel anger anymore. Not the fiery, immediate kind, at least. What lingered was something colder, sharper, a clarity born from the realization that the woman he had loved had already chosen to leave him in all the ways that mattered. And so, he began to plan his departure. Not in haste, but methodically, with the same precision he had once used to build their life together. Only this time, he was building an escape. The decision to leave was made in the quiet hours of the night, and by morning David's resolve was unshakable. The betrayal he had uncovered left no room for negotiation or reconciliation. He couldn't confront Emily, not because he feared her reaction, but because he knew her words would be hollow. Lies, excuses, and manipulations were all that remained in their shared life. For David, the only path forward was one without her. The first step was financial independence. Their joint bank account had once symbolized trust and unity, but now it was just another tie he needed to sever. That Monday, under the guise of heading to work early, David stopped by the bank. His hands trembled slightly as he sat across from the teller, requesting to open a private account. He transferred a significant portion of their savings, enough to secure his future, but leaving enough behind to avoid immediate suspicion. As he walked out of the bank, a strange mix of guilt and relief settled over him. This was the first tangible step toward freedom. Back at home, David started packing, carefully, methodically, and without drawing attention. He knew Emily would notice if he cleared out entire drawers or took large items all at once, so he moved piece by piece. A pair of jeans one day, a few shirts the next. His favorite books, framed photos of his parents, and other irreplaceable items were tucked away into the trunk of his car during moments when Emily was out or distracted. The hardest part was maintaining the facade of normalcy. Emily's behavior had shifted slightly. She seemed more distant, but she also didn't question him. She likely assumed his quietness was him sulking or processing their fight from earlier in the week. She didn't know that every time she left the house, he was researching rental properties, calling moving companies, and preparing his exit. By Wednesday, David had secured a small apartment 2 states away. The place was nothing like the home they had built together. It was sparse and impersonal, but that was exactly what he needed. A clean slate, free from the memories that haunted every corner of their house. The lease was signed under his full name, but he used a P.O. box for forwarding mail, ensuring Emily wouldn't be able to track him down easily. The evenings were the hardest. Sitting across from Emily at the dinner table, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her phone screen, David felt the weight of everything he was leaving behind. There had been love here once, real and deep. But now, every smile, every casual comment felt like a mockery of the life they had once shared. "Are you okay?" Emily asked one evening, her tone casual but laced with faint concern. David forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." She shrugged and returned to her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. The tinkling of a music box in the distance brought him forth. By Friday, David was ready. His belongings were packed, his finances were secure, and his new apartment awaited. All that was left was the final goodbye. He sat at the kitchen table late that night, the house eerily silent, and wrote the letter. The words came slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. "Emily, I know. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me." He placed a note on the counter and weighed it down with her favorite coffee mug. It felt strangely poetic, leaving a part of her familiar world intact while dismantling the rest. He didn't write more, not because he lacked things to say, but because no words could encapsulate the depth of his heartbreak or the finality of his decision. That night, David barely slept. At 4 a.m., he slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her. The house was dark and still as he made his way to the front door, his packed bags already waiting in the car. He paused for a moment, taking in the home they had built together one last time. The memories, the laughter, the arguments, the dreams, flashed before his eyes. But they felt distant now, like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to him. The cool morning air hit his face as he stepped outside, the horizon just beginning to lighten with the first signs of dawn. He started the car and drove away without looking back. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, David felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The pain of betrayal still burned within him, but for the first time in weeks there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to start anew, unburdened by the lies that had tainted his marriage. By the time Emily woke up later that morning, the man she thought she knew was gone, and her life would never be the same. Paul Priam writes this section, saying, "The house was eerily silent at 4 a.m., the kind of quiet that felt almost oppressive. David stood in the doorway of the bedroom he had shared with Emily for years, watching her sleep one last time. Her face, relaxed in slumber, was a haunting reminder of the woman he had once loved and trusted without question. But now, that face only reminded him of the betrayal, the lies, and the hollow void where their connection used to be. He turned away, unwilling to let the sight of her weaken his resolve. The faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet sounded deafening in the stillness. He froze, holding his breath. But Emily didn't stir. A wave of relief washed over him. He couldn't bear the thought of a confrontation, not now, not when he was so close to leaving it all behind. The house felt different in the early morning darkness, its usual warmth replaced with a suffocating emptiness. The walls, once adorned with shared memories, now seemed to close in on him. Each photo and piece of furniture a cruel reminder of what had been lost. David moved through the house slowly, methodically, as if saying goodbye to each room. His footsteps echoed faintly, the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. In the kitchen, his letter sat on the counter, weighed down by Emily's favorite coffee mug. The sight of it gave him a pang of regret, but he reminded himself that this was the only way. There were no words that could truly explain the depth of his pain or the finality of his decision. The letter wasn't closure, it was simply a statement of fact. He couldn't stay, not anymore. As he picked up his last bag and walked toward the door, a wave of emotions surged within him. Sadness, anger, regret, and something unexpected. Relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his chest, allowing him to breathe freely for the first time in weeks. Leaving wasn't easy, but staying would have destroyed him. The cold morning air hit his face as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the faint light of the pre-dawn hour. The car sat waiting in the driveway, packed with everything he deemed irreplaceable. He opened the door and placed the bag inside, his movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring these final moments of departure. Before getting in, David turned to look at the house one last time. The familiar silhouette of the place he had called home stood quiet and unassuming, bathed in the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. He thought of the laughter that had once filled its rooms, the dreams they had built together, and the life he had imagined would last forever. But those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "It's time." Sliding into the driver's seat, he started the engine. The hum of the car was a sharp contrast to the stillness of the morning. For a moment he hesitated, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The temptation to stay, to try one last time to salvage what was left, flickered briefly in his mind. But then he remembered the texts, the hotel receipt, and the way Emily had looked at him with such dismissive indifference when he'd asked for the truth. The thought solidified his resolve. As the car pulled out of the driveway, David refused to look back. The house, the memories, and the pain faded into the background as he drove toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The road stretched out ahead of him, a path to freedom, to a life where he could rebuild without the shadow of betrayal looming over him. In that moment, as the house disappeared from his rearview mirror, David felt a strange sense of peace. The sadness was still there, lingering like an old wound, but it was accompanied by something new. Hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was free to move forward, unburdened by the lies that had weighed him down. The past was behind him now. All that mattered was the road ahead. The morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains, stirring Emily from her sleep. She stretched lazily, her head still heavy from the previous night's sleep. Reaching across the bed, she expected to feel David's warmth, but her hand met only the cool, empty sheets. Frowning, she sat up, rubbing her temples. "David?" she called out groggily, her voice echoing in the quiet house. No answer came. Still half asleep, Emily shuffled out of bed and made her way to the kitchen. The house felt unusually still, an eerie silence that unsettled her. It wasn't until she entered the kitchen that she noticed something was off. Her favorite coffee mug sat on the counter, anchoring a single sheet of paper. Frowning, she picked up the note and began to read. "Emily, I know, I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me." Her stomach dropped. For a moment, she stood frozen, rereading the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But the meaning was clear. David was gone. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, this can't be happening." Panic surged through her as she dropped the letter and ran through the house. She threw open closet doors, drawers, and cabinets, her movements frantic. Half of his belongings were missing. His clothes, his toiletries, even his favorite books. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. He hadn't just left for the day, he had left for good. She collapsed onto the living room couch, clutching her phone with trembling hands. Dialing his number, she pressed the phone to her ear, her breath hitching with each ring. The call went straight to voicemail. "David, please call me back," she said, her voice cracking. "We need to talk, just, please." Her text messages followed, one after another, growing more desperate with each failed response. "Where are you? What's going on? David, this isn't funny. Please come home." But the silence was deafening. The realization that he wasn't coming back settled heavily in her chest. Her panic turned to anger, a sharp, hot emotion that bubbled to the surface. "How could he do this?" she muttered to herself, pacing the living room. "What kind of person just leaves without a word?" But deep down, she knew the answer. As the hours dragged on, her anger began to wane, replaced by a sinking despair. Emily called her closest friends, searching for comfort and answers. "David's gone," she said, her voice trembling. "He just left. I don't know what to do." Her friends were sympathetic at first, offering their support and promising to reach out to David if they could. But as the days passed, the truth of her infidelity began to surface. Whispers turned to outright confrontations. One of her closest friends, Claire, was the first to confront her. "Emily, I have to ask, what really happened? Why did David leave?" Emily started by asking Claire to explain to her what she had felt when he, in part word for word, in the introduction to her oldest son. Emily hesitated, her voice faltering. "We were having problems, I guess. He overreacted." "Overreacted?" Claire's voice was sharp. "Emily, come on. Everyone knows about Jake. Did you really think it wouldn't come out?" The accusation hung in the air, and Emily couldn't find the words to defend herself. She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "It was stupid, a mistake. I didn't think David would find out." Claire shook her head, her disappointment evident. "Emily, You betrayed him. What did you expect? That he'd just forgive you and move on? Emily didn't answer. She and Sal simply looked at Paul, and he agreed with her. The conversation left Emily reeling. The support she had hoped for from her friends was slipping away, replaced by judgment and distance. Even her family, usually her unwavering source of comfort, began to pull back. When she finally confessed the truth to her mother, she was met with a look of quiet disappointment. "You had a good man, Emily," her mother said, her voice heavy with sadness. "And you threw it all away. I don't know what to say to you." The isolation was suffocating. Emily's attempts to reach out to Jake, the man she had risked everything for, were met with silence. He ignored her calls and texts, leaving her to face the fallout alone. Financial struggles soon compounded her emotional turmoil. With David gone and their joint account nearly empty, Emily found herself scrambling to cover bills and expenses. She had always relied on David to manage their finances, and now she was left to face the harsh realities of her choices. Late one night, as she sat alone in the dimly lit living room, Emily allowed herself to fully confront what she had done. The letter David had left was still on the counter, its presence a constant reminder of her betrayal. She picked it up and read it again, her tears blurring the words. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." Bill, she called. But the apology felt hollow even to her own ears. She knew it was too late to fix what she had broken. All that remained was the emptiness of her choices and the life she had lost. David's new apartment was a far cry from the brick home he had shared with Emily. It was small and sparsely furnished, the beige walls bare, and the floor scuffed from years of wear. Yet in its simplicity, it offered him something his old life no longer could: a clean slate. As he unpacked his belongings, each item carefully chosen to bring with him, he felt the first stirrings of freedom. This space, though modest, was his alone, a symbol of the life he was determined to rebuild. The first few days were disorienting. The silence of the apartment, once a comfort, now felt overwhelming. Without the familiar rhythms of his old life, David struggled to fill the void. He spent his mornings organizing the space, his afternoons walking the city streets, and his evenings staring at the ceiling, the weight of his past pressing down on him. Memories of Emily haunted him. Her laugh, the way she used to look at him with love, but these moments were now tainted, each one laced with the bitter knowledge of her betrayal. Still, David was determined to move forward. He threw himself into his new job at a small marketing firm, finding solace in the structure it provided. His colleagues were friendly and welcoming, and the work gave him a sense of purpose. Slowly, he began to build a routine, anchoring himself in the small victories of everyday life, meeting a deadline, sharing a cozy cafe down the street. Yet, the pain lingered. At night, when the distractions faded, he found himself replaying the events that had led him here. The texts, the hotel charge, Emily's dismissive laughter, they were ghosts that refused to be silenced. He wondered if he had made the right choice, if leaving had been the only option. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the life he deserved, a life free from lies and betrayal. After a few months, David began to dip his toes into the world of dating. At first, it was more about proving to himself that he could move on than a genuine search for connection. He met people at coffee shops and through apps, sharing polite conversations over dinner or drinks. Most of these dates were fleeting, leaving him with a mix of awkwardness and hope, but they reminded him that not all relationships were doomed to fail, that there were people out there who valued honesty and loyalty. One evening, while scrolling through social media, David stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend. It was a photo of Emily at a gathering, her smile forced and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. The caption read, "Hard times build strong people." David stared at the image for a long moment, a tangle of emotions swirling within him. She looked thinner, her vibrant energy replaced by something subdued and hollow. He scrolled through her profile, noticing the change. The once frequent posts of outings, selfies, and cheerful updates had dwindled to near silence. Mutual friends commented vaguely, their words hinting at struggles she had confided in them but hadn't shared publicly. It was clear she was struggling, both emotionally and socially. David closed the app, his emotions conflicted. Part of him felt vindicated. She was facing the consequences of her actions, something she had avoided for so long. But another part of him felt a pang of pity. He had loved her once, and seeing her so diminished was a painful reminder of the life they had shared and lost. Still, he knew that her struggles were no longer his burden to bear. Emily's journey was hers alone, just as his was now solely his own. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of peace. He didn't need to fix her, nor did he need to seek revenge or validation. He had walked away, and that had been enough. As David turned his attention back to his life, he focused on the future. The city around him, unfamiliar and full of possibility, began to feel like home. He started exploring hobbies he had neglected during his marriage, reading more, jogging along the river, and even taking a painting class. Each new experience was a small act of reclaiming himself, a step toward the person he wanted to become. Though the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined him. The pain was still there, but it had softened, becoming a part of his story rather than the entirety of it. And as he stood by the window of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, David felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The cafe was warm and inviting, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint hum of conversation. David had come to this place often over the past few months. It had become a quiet refuge, a spot where he could sit with a book or his thoughts, away from the noise of the city and the lingering shadows of his past. He was stirring cream into his coffee when the bell over the door chimed and a gust of cool air signaled the arrival of a new customer. He glanced up casually, his attention more on the swirl of his coffee than the door, but the sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Standing there, her hair shorter than he remembered, was Emily. She looked thinner, her posture uncertain, as though the weight of something unseen bore down on her. She hadn't noticed him yet, her gaze scanning the room for an empty table. David's first instinct was to slip out quietly, to avoid the encounter altogether. But something held him in place, a strange mix of curiosity and resolve. She finally spotted him, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, neither of them moved, the world around them seeming to blur and fade. "David?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, setting his spoon down with deliberate calm. "Emily." He hesitated before walking toward him, each step slow and measured. When she reached his table, she stood there awkwardly, clutching the strap of her purse as though it were a lifeline. "Do you mind if I sit?" she asked, her tone tentative. David considered her for a long moment before gesturing to the chair across from him. "Go ahead." Emily sank into the seat, her hands clasped tightly on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "You look well," she said finally, her voice uncertain. David raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral. I've been doing fine. And you?" She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. "I've been better," she admitted. "David, She paused, her voice catching. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Neither was I," he replied evenly, his gaze steady. "But here we are." Emily's eyes filled with tears and she quickly wiped them away, her composure crumbling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for everything. Losing you. It made me realize what I had, what I ruined." David leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I trusted you," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I gave you everything, Emily, and you threw it away." Her tears fell freely now, her voice breaking as she spoke. I know. I don't have an excuse. I don't even know why I did it. I was selfish, reckless, and I've paid for it every single day since you left. David's gaze softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. Regret doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the lies or the betrayal. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to tell you how sorry I am. You didn't deserve what I did to you. For a moment, David said nothing, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him felt vindicated, hearing her admit her guilt, but another part of him felt an ache he hadn't anticipated, a bittersweet pain that came from seeing someone he had loved reduced to this broken version of herself. I appreciate the apology, he said finally, his tone measured. But it doesn't change anything. I've moved on, Emily. And so should you. She looked up at him, her eyes red and filled with despair. I'll never forgive myself, she said, her voice trembling. Not for what I did to you. David's expression softened further, though his resolve didn't waver. That's your burden to bear, he said gently. Not mine. Emily nodded slowly, her tears drying as resignation settled over her. I understand, she said, her voice quiet. I won't bother you again. I hope you're happy, David. Truly. For the first time in their conversation, David allowed himself a small, genuine smile. I am. And I hope you find peace, Emily. We both deserve that. She stood, her movements hesitant, as though she wasn't ready to leave but knew she had to. David watched her walk away, her figure disappearing through the door and out of sight. As the bell over the door chimed once more, David sat back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. The encounter had stirred emotions he thought he had buried, but it also brought a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. Emily's apology didn't erase the pain, but it allowed him to fully let go of the bitterness that had lingered. He picked up his coffee, the warmth grounding him, and looked out the window. The city bustled on, indifferent to the quiet resolution that had just unfolded inside the cafe. For the first time, David felt truly free, not just from Emily, but from the weight of their shared past. And as he sipped his coffee, he allowed himself to think not of what he had lost, but of everything that still lay ahead. Emily's journey after the cafe encounter was anything but easy. The confrontation with David had left her raw, forcing her to finally confront the full weight of her actions. The guilt she had carried quietly for months now felt unbearable, and the consequences of her betrayal were no longer abstract. They were her reality. Her social circle, once vibrant and full of laughter, had dwindled. The whispers of her infidelity had spread, tarnishing her reputation. Friends she once leaned on kept their distance, some openly questioning her integrity. Claire, her closest confidant, had been particularly blunt. You need to own up to what you did, Emily. Pretending it didn't happen isn't going to fix anything. Even her family, who had always supported her, grew colder. Her mother's disappointment lingered in every conversation, a subtle but painful reminder of how far Emily had fallen. You had a chance at a good life, her mother said one evening over the phone, and you threw it away. You can't keep running from that. For a while, Emily sank deeper into despair, the weight of her isolation pressing down on her. But slowly she began to realize that no one was coming to save her. Not her family, not her friends, and certainly not David. If she was going to rebuild her life, it would have to start with her. Taking accountability was the first and hardest step. Emily began reaching out to those she had hurt, not to seek forgiveness, but to acknowledge her mistakes. Some accepted her apologies with a wary kindness, while others remained distant, their trust too shattered to repair. It was a humbling experience, one that forced her to see herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of her own pain. Professionally, she threw herself into her work, determined to prove to herself more than anyone that she could be dependable again. The effort began to pay off, albeit slowly. She rebuilt her reputation within her field, taking on extra responsibilities and showing a level of dedication that surprised even her. Though her personal life remained fractured, the small victories at work gave her a sense of purpose and a sliver of hope. Meanwhile, David's life moved forward with a quiet steadiness. The cafe meeting had given him the closure he hadn't realized he was still seeking. Hearing Emily's apology, though painful, allowed him to fully let go of the bitterness that had lingered. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was enough for him to feel free from the shadows of their shared past. His new life, though simple, was fulfilling in ways he hadn't anticipated. He continued to grow in his job, building strong relationships with colleagues who admired his quiet determination. Outside of work, he found joy in the little things. A morning run by the river, a book he couldn't put down, or a weekend spent exploring the city's hidden corners. These small moments felt like pieces of a puzzle, slowly coming together, forming a picture of a life he was proud to call his own. Occasionally, thoughts of Emily would surface, fleeting memories of their happier days, or brief pangs of sadness for what had been lost. But these moments no longer consumed him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he had come, of the resilience he had discovered within himself. As months turned into a year, David began to open his heart again. The dates became less about distraction and more about genuine connection. He met someone, a kind, thoughtful woman whose presence felt like a gentle balm to his still healing soul. It wasn't love yet, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, David felt hopeful about what the future might hold. Emily's path remained solitary for the most part, but she found a sense of peace in her solitude. She had learned to take responsibility for her actions, and though the scars of her mistakes would always remain, they no longer defined her. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, not as the person she used to be, but as someone stronger, someone who had faced her failures and chosen to move forward. For both David and Emily, the aftermath of their relationship was a journey of growth, pain, and eventual healing. They had loved and hurt each other in ways that left lasting marks, but those marks became part of their stories, not the end of them, but chapters in lives that continued to unfold. And in that, they both found a kind of peace. David sat on the balcony of his small apartment, the city lights flickering in the distance like scattered stars. A gentle breeze rustled the pages of the book in his lap, but his mind wasn't on the words. He leaned back, letting the cool air wash over him, and closed his eyes. For the first time in what felt like years, his chest didn't feel heavy. The bitterness was gone, replaced by something quieter, indifference. He no longer replayed the moments of betrayal or the fights that had marked the end of his marriage. The sharp edges of anger and hurt had dulled over time, leaving behind only a faint ache, like the echo of a long-faded melody. He thought of Emily occasionally, but the thoughts no longer carried the weight they once did. She was a part of his story, yes, but not the part that defined him. His life now was simple but fulfilling. Each day brought small victories, progress at work, laughter shared with new friends, and a growing sense of connection with the world around him. The future no longer felt like a void to be feared, but a canvas waiting to be painted. As David gazed out over the city, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Betrayal had shattered him, but it had also forced him to grow, to confront the pieces of himself he had overlooked. Loss had taught him resilience, and accountability had given him strength. This chapter of his life was closed now, the pages written and bound. And as he set his book aside and looked toward the horizon, David felt only one thing: hope. The past was behind him, and the future, his alone, stretched endlessly ahead.